March along, sing a song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name. We're the army and proudly proclaim. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might. And the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won. And the army goes rolling along. And it's high, high, hey, the army's on its way. Count off the cadence loud and strong. For wherever we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along.
Good afternoon. As you all know, the president will be speaking this afternoon in Louisville, and we've got an event coming up, so I'll try to keep this relatively short to focus on, let the president focus on his message for the day. In regard to the news of the day, this morning, after receiving his daily intelligence briefing, the president met with Bill Gates, the co-chair and trustee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The president and Mr. Gates talked about their shared commitment to finding and stopping disease outbreaks around the world. The president particularly commended Mr. Gates for the Gates Foundation work in global health and health security. Generous and innovative private philanthropic groups like the Gates Foundation are critical to our mission of finding the cures for tomorrow. Also this morning, the confirmation hearings in the Judiciary Committee began for the president's nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Neil Gorsuch. As the judge will continue to show throughout his process, he's eminently qualified for this position with impeccable academic credentials, a brilliant legal mind, and a proven commitment to the Constitution. On Tuesday and Wednesday, Judge Gorsuch will be questioned by each member of the panel, and on Thursday we anticipate things to conclude with a panel of witnesses. The president was glad to see so many people convey their support in the last few days for Judge Gorsuch. Just this past weekend, Senator Grassley, former New York Mayor Bloomberg, editorial boards from across the country, and several of his former colleagues and classmates either penned op-eds and editorials or provided comments in one way or another stating his impeccable qualifications for the bench. They add to the long list of jurists, politicians, and elected officials from both sides of the aisle who have already given the judge their support. The president looks forward to watching Judge Gorsuch continue to show the Senate what an extraordinary addition he will be to the bench, and he's confident that he will be confirmed. Later in the morning, the president had a meeting with Speaker Ryan, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Tom Price, and Dr. Zeke Emanuel. Dr. Emanuel has been intimately involved in crafting healthcare policy since his work on Obamacare. Obviously, he and the president have some differing views on the best way to make healthcare affordable and accessible, but the president also strongly believes that the health and well-being of the American people shouldn't always be a partisan issue, and he will continue to reach across party lines and listen to voices on this issue. Last week, he heard from individuals and families who have suffered from the disastrous results of Obamacare. He's previously spoken to healthcare policy groups, Republican congressional leadership, and health insurance companies. This week, he and his staff will have discussions on women in healthcare while continuing an open dialogue with members of Congress. And he will be hosting even more meetings and listening sessions in the coming weeks as he works with Congress to bring common sense reforms to our healthcare system. The president has shown that he's willing to hear from all stakeholders in the healthcare field, and he will continue to listen as the process on the American Health Care Act moves along and we pursue the additional legislative and administrative actions necessary. This afternoon, the president had lunch with the vice president, and as we speak, he's meeting with Secretary of State Tillerson. The secretary just returned from an important trip to Asia. He made it clear that America is committed to our allies, Japan and the Republic of Korea, and that we expect China to increase its role in persuading North Korea to move away from nuclear weapon and ballistic missile development and towards steps to create a better future for the North Korean people. This trip set the stage for future leader level engagement between the U.S. and China. During this meeting, he will debrief the president on his trip. Later this afternoon, the president will welcome the Prime Minister al-Abadi of Iraq. The Iraqi people have been a brave and steadfast partner in our shared fight against ISIS, al-Qaeda, and radicalism. The president will speak with the Prime Minister about how that partnership will help defeat ISIS and move into a new era in which Iraq is a force for stability and peace in a prosperous Middle East. After his bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister, the president will depart the White House for Louisville, Kentucky for a Make America Great Again rally before returning to the White House later this evening. A few notes at the end before I take some questions. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin returned from a very successful trip to Europe, where he stopped in the UK for a bilateral with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and later met with 18 of his counterparts during the G20 ministerial in Baden-Baden. This trip gave the Secretary an opportunity to outline the administration's priorities on a number of issues, including macroeconomic policy, financial regulation, international tax, and illicit finance. During the meetings, the Secretary and his counterparts presented a platform that will strengthen our collective work on steps to promote growth and financial stability. In terms of the schedule for the rest of the week, tomorrow the President will sign S-442, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Transition Authorization Act of 2017 in the morning, and make remarks at the National Republican Congressional Committee March dinner in the evening. On Wednesday, as I mentioned last week, the President will meet with the Congressional Black Caucus. On Thursday, the President will hold an event with truck drivers and representatives from the trucking companies and industry on healthcare and its negative impacts on their industry and livelihood, which just happens to be the largest employer in 29 states. And on Friday, the President will hold a Greek Independence Day celebration. We'll have further updates on all of those events later. And finally, I want to address the House Intelligence Committee hearing that is currently happening, in which the FBI Director and the NSA Director are currently testifying, and comment to the extent that I can at this time. This hearing, as Chairman Nunes noted, is the first of several that the House Intelligence Committee is engaged in, and the President is happy that they're pursuing the facts in this. As has been previously reported, Director Comey confirmed that the FBI is investigating Russia's role in interfering with the election, and let me just comment briefly on that. Following this testimony, it's clear that nothing has changed. Senior Obama intelligence officials have gone on record to confirm that there is no evidence of a Trump-Russia collusion. The Obama CIA director said so, Obama's director of national intelligence said so, and we take them at their word. However, there was some new information that came from the hearing that we believe is newsworthy about the intelligence gathering process, and the unmasking of Americans identified in intelligence reports, and the illegal leak of such unmasked individuals, which is a federal crime. Director Comey told the House Intelligence Committee that certain political appointees in the Obama administration had access to the names of unmasked U.S. citizens, such as senior White House officials, senior Department of Justice officials, and senior intelligence officials. Before President Obama left office, Michael Flynn was unmasked, and then illegally his identity was leaked out to media outlets, despite the fact that, as NSA Director Rogers said, that unmasking and revealing individuals endangers, quote, national security. Not only was General Flynn's identity made available, Director Comey refused to answer the question on whether or not he had actually briefed President Obama on his phone calls and activities. Director Comey called these types of disclosures of classified information a threat to national security and said he will investigate and pursue these matters to the full extent of law. He also said that the leaking of classified information had become, quote, unusually active in the time frame in question. It's also important to note that both Directors Comey and Rogers told the committee that they have no evidence that votes were changed in the swing states the president had won. I think that pretty much, until we get the ending of this hearing, I don't know that I want to comment too much further. And with that, I'm glad to take a few questions. Jonathan.
Sean, does the president still have complete confidence in FBI Director Comey?
There's no reason to believe he doesn't at this time. John.
He said, he said that there is no information to support the allegations that the president made against President Obama
at this time.
So is the president prepared to withdraw that accusation and apologize to the president?
No, we started a hearing. It's still ongoing. And then, as Chairman Nunes mentioned, this is one in a series of hearings that will be happening. I think there's, as I noted last week, there's also a lot of interesting news coming out of that in terms of the activities that have gone on to reveal the information on American citizens that have been part of this, particularly General Flynn. There's a lot of things that aren't being covered in this hearing that I think are interesting. That since it's ongoing, I'll leave that for now. But I think there's a lot of areas that still need to be covered. There's a lot of information that still needs to be discussed.
The director also said he's investigating the links and the possibility of coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Given that the president just this morning said that the Democrats made up the Russia story, why would the FBI director be investigating a story if it's simply...
I don't think that's what he said, but again, look at what...
No, he did. He said that he's investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether or not there was any coordination.
Correct. But again, investigating it and having proof of it are two different things. You look at the acting Obama CIA director said that there's smoke, but there's no fire. Senator Tom Cotton, not that I'm seen and not that I'm aware of. You look at Director Clapper, not to my knowledge. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, I have no evidence of collusion. I mean, there's a point at which you continue to search for something that everybody who's been briefed hasn't seen or found. I think it's fine to look into it, but at the end of the day, they're going to come to the same conclusion that everybody else has had. So you can continue to look for something, but continuing to look for something that doesn't exist doesn't matter. There is a discussion, I heard some names floated around before, that were hangers-on on the campaign. And I think at some point, people that, got thrown around at the beginning of this hearing, some of those names, the greatest amount of interaction that they've had is had cease and desist letters sent to them. So,
I think the Roger Stones and the Carter Pages.
Yeah, exactly. The Carter Pages, yes. But I mean, those people, the greatest amount of interaction that they had with the campaign was the campaign apparently sending them a series of cease and desist letters. So again, I think that when you read a lot of this activity about associates, there is a fine line between people who want to be part of something that they never had an official role in and people who actually played a role in either the campaign or the transition. Julie.
I just have two quick questions on the hearing today. Does the president, now that we know that there is an ongoing investigation by the FBI, does the president stand by his comments that he's not aware of any contacts that his campaign associates had with Russia during the election?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second one is, has anyone from the White House...
Well, can I just amend the first?
Sure.
Obviously, just to be clear, I know that I'm trying to think through this for a second because obviously General Flynn,
Right.
But again,
During the campaign,
right,
before the election.
And I'm not aware of any at this time, but even General Flynn was a volunteer of the campaign. And then obviously there's been this discussion of Paul Manafort, who played a very limited role for a very limited amount of time. But beyond,
But are you
hey, Jonathan, hold on. Can you stop interrupting other people's questions? Hey, Jonathan, somebody's asking a question. It's not your press briefing. Julie's asking a question. Please calm down.
Just to
Julie.
clarify that, are you saying then that the president is aware of contacts that Manafort...
No, nothing that hasn't been previously discussed. I just don't want to make it look like we're not aware of the stuff that's
Understood.
been.
And then the second thing, has anyone from the White House up to the president been interviewed by the FBI as part of this investigation?
Not that I'm aware of. Mara.
You said that, you made a point of saying that Comey refused to say whether he had briefed Obama about the investigation, and also the president on his official account tweeted the same thing today. Comey made a point today of saying, please do not draw any conclusions from my ability to confirm or deny anything, but you are drawing a conclusion from that. So
I think we're pointing it out. I mean, we're making a point that it is not known, and I think there's further. I mean, to everyone who was looking for a conclusion today, I think there's a lot more that needs to be discussed and looked at before we can jump to a conclusion about. Hold on, but I think the point is that in the same token, you've got individuals that want an answer. And at the same time, there's clearly a lot of information that still hasn't come out or been discussed.
So you're looking forward to this investigation?
I think that there is a lot more to come, is the answer that I...
The reason that I'm asking this question is you said that they are going to come to the same conclusion of everybody else.
My point is that...
So you already know what the conclusion
No.
is.
What I'm getting at is that there is this media narrative that continues to talk about collusion that exists, and yet every person that's been briefed, Nunes, Tom Cotton, Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, Clapper, the Obama appointee, have all said that nothing that they've seen makes them believe that there was any collusion. And I think there's a difference between talking about an investigation into the 2016 election, which we all know, and any evidence of collusion. There is no evidence, according to the people that have been briefed, of any collusion or activity that leads them to believe that exists. I think that is an important point that gets overlooked over and over and over again.
It's fine to look into it, but they are going to come to the same conclusion of everybody else, that this collusion doesn't exist. So you already know.
No, I don't.
When
What
the
I'm
investigation's finished,
no,
that's it.
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that every single person, because what the director said today is that there's an ongoing investigation. My point is to say that everybody who's been briefed on that investigation, there's an assumption that because of an investigation, it must mean that it's about something. My point to you is that there's an assumption on behalf of most people in the media about what that investigation must mean. And my point to you is that despite the narrative that gets played over and over again with respect to what the investigation might mean in terms of collusion, every person, Republican and Democrat, that's been briefed on it has come to the same conclusion that there is no collusion and that that's over. So while we can talk about an investigation big picture holistically, the idea that so many people are trying to jump to a conclusion seems very, very misguided. Zeke.
Thanks, Sean. Two quick ones. First, this off the Tillerson briefing with the president. Do you expect the invitation to President Xi for that summit that's been reported on for next month to be, was that extended on that trip? Do you expect that to be taking place early April 5th, 6th, 7th?
I'll try to have more of a readout afterwards. I know that they're going to talk extensively about what he accomplished in both, Japan, South Korea, and obviously in Beijing. But I'm going to let the Secretary of State debrief the president before I get ahead of deciding what was discussed in Beijing.
Back to the previous topic, I was hoping you could square the circle a little bit. You said in the case of the president's tweets that there's an ongoing investigation, that more things will come out that may justify that. But in the case of the collusion charge, you listed all the people who said there's no investigation there. Why, in one case, is that sufficient to say that there is no, you can rule out collusion now, versus in the other case you can say, oh, there's going to be more information coming out that will prove these tweets
because again, I think there's a difference. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm merely explaining to you that every person, Republican, Democrat, Obama, that served in the Obama administration, across a broad section.
Same thing about the tweets.
In terms of what?
That they're.
But I think that there's on the investigation itself, we know from the people who have been briefed. On the other piece of it, we know that it's an ongoing thing, and that even according to the Department of Justice, in terms of the information that's been provided, and Chairman Nunes, that they are still at the beginning of this process. That is a very different thing than a group of people saying there is an ongoing investigation, and from what we've been briefed, there is no evidence to suggest any type of conclusion. That's a difference. Hunter.
Thanks, Sean. On a slightly different topic, in his first 8 weeks in office, President Trump has made at least 10 trips to the golf course. He regularly used to criticize President Obama for spending time on the course. How is his golf game any different?
Well, I think two things. One is you saw him utilize this as an opportunity with Prime Minister Abe to help foster deeper relationships in Southeast Asia, in Asia rather, and have a growing relationship that's going to help U.S. interests. How you use the game of golf is something that he's talked about. Secondly, we went to he had a mini cabinet meeting the other day or 2 weekends ago down at his club in Virginia. And I remember so many people jumping to the conclusion that he was going down and playing golf. Just because you go somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you did it. So on a couple occasions, he's actually conducted meetings there. He's actually had phone calls. So just because he heads there doesn't mean that that's what's happening. So
I know he did meet with Prime Minister Abe on the course, but we're not getting a lot of details on other high-level meetings that are taking place. If he is having these productive meetings on the course, why isn't the president and his aides being a little more forthcoming about what he's doing?
It's the same reason that he can have dinner or lunch with somebody, and not because I think the president's entitled to a bit of privacy at some point, where we bring that, which is what we've always agreed to. We bring the protective pool to be there, but the president's also entitled to a bit of privacy as well. Trey.
Does the president believe the FBI will do a fair job of investigating any sort of links to Russia during the election? And then I have one more for you.
I think there's a variety of institutions looking at it, both the House and the Senate Intelligence Committee, the FBI. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you get to the bottom of it, it's we'll have a much better picture of what's happening, and I think it'll continue to vindicate him on that. Go ahead.
In the follow-up, the president tweeted this morning a question about a potential DNC connection to Russia during the election.
Right.
Is he under the impression that the Clinton campaign had inappropriate contact with Russia during the election?
Well, I think that and that's an interesting aspect of all of this that's not being covered. Number one, from everything that has been publicly available, on several occasions the DNC was asked by the FBI to investigate or to allow their servers to be looked at, despite all of the claims of their concerns about leaking. And yet the question still doesn't come out. Why wouldn't the DNC on multiple occasions rebuff the FBI? Why were they not wanting, if they were so concerned about hacks and leaking, why did the DNC not ask the FBI to come look? Not only did they not ask them, they rebuffed them on multiple occasions. Why? What are they hiding? What were they concerned of? But I think there's a serious question. I mean, they're very clear about the concerns that they have, and as well as all of the leadership in the Democratic Party. And yet, when it came to hacks and leaks out of the DNC, and they're quick to jump to the conclusion about who did it, and yet they wouldn't allow the FBI to investigate it. There's a whole second set of concerns here in terms of what was Hillary Clinton's role. I mean, you look at the Obama history, of the Obama administration, and the Clintons' involvement with Russia in terms of donations that the Clintons received from Russian entities. The idea that they sold off tremendous amount of the uranium to the Russian government, and yet where was the concern for that? What are we doing to look into that? It was the Obama administration in 2009 that talked about a reset with Russia and a desire to reset relationships. It was Hillary Clinton who signed off on the deal that gave a Russian company 1/5 of the U.S. uranium supply. Where is the questioning about that? What did they get? There was discussion the other day about a Russian official noting that both campaigns, they sought to do it. Where is the concern about their efforts on the Hillary Clinton thing? The Democrats and the Democratic Party and a lot of those individuals are quick to point fingers, and yet when it comes to discussing their own collusion or questions involving their involvement with Russian officials or buy-offs to the Russians, there's no discussion there. So you've got to wonder on both sides, where's the parity when it comes to these kind of investigations? Margaret.
Sean, what constitutes conclusive evidence for the president on this front when you say there's more to come forward? You've got the FBI director saying nothing to back up the president's tweets about wiretapping, former head of the DNI, House Intelligence Committees. I mean, we've had a series of officials. So when does this end for the president? Is it March 28th?
It's not a question of a date. It's a question of where we get answers. You look at someone like Michael Flynn, and you ask the question, how does an American citizen who should be protected by law from having their identity unmasked, how does that happen? Because you got to think about it like this. The FBI and all of the relevant intelligence agencies have access to this document. They can figure out who it was, right?
Sorry.
Hold on. So
Who it was?
hold on. In other words,
The wiretapping of the president. That's the
listen,
claim.
I understand that. What I'm getting at is that there's a lot of information that we have come to learn about what happened in terms of surveillance throughout the 2016 election and the transition. And when you look at somebody like Michael Flynn and you realize that while they might have been looking at somebody else at that time, how does somebody's name that's protected by law from being disclosed get put out in the public? Why was it put out in the public? Because the people in the intelligence community would have had access to that information. They could have found out who it was. But yet, you've got to question, why was a name that should have been protected by law from being put out into the public domain put out there? What were the motives behind that? What else do we need to know? Who was behind that kind of unmasking?
So are you saying the president has evidence that we have
No,
yet
no,
to be
I am saying
seen in
that there's a
public?
lot more questions that need to get asked about what was being done in terms of surveillance, who was being surveilled, why were they being surveilled, what techniques, why are certain people being sort of, quote, unmasked and having their identity known? What was going on? But there's a lot more questions than answers that need to get asked.
Who does the president trust to provide those
And I think
answers,
we've
if
talked
not
about
the heads of all those agencies?
And we've talked about this ad nauseum, that the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees are looking into this. Today is the first of several hearings that Chairman Nunes intends to call. Senator Burr has already talked about it. There's a ways to go, and I get that you guys want to know the end of the book right now, but we're on the first chapter of this process. Steve.
So Burr and Nunes, he does trust them.
Of course.
To provide those
We've
advances.
put out a statement saying so much that we asked them to look into it. So I don't think it should come into any surprise that that's where we have noted multiple times that's where the president believes the appropriate place in the process and the and for all of these documents to go through. Steve.
The president said he had a lot of meetings over the weekend on North Korea. Who were those meetings with, and what was his reaction to North Korea's test of this new rocket engine?
Well, I think we continue to be concerned with North Korea's activity. That's why not only have we continued to have conversations with officials in Japan and South Korea, but continue to urge China to step in and to play a larger role in deterring both the ballistic and other missile threats that North Korea plays. I will try to have a further readout on some of those conversations, but I think there is a growing concern about North Korea. I think that is part of what Secretary Tillerson is going to be discussing with him during their meeting.
And did Tillerson get a promise from China to weigh in more on North Korea?
I think he sent a very clear signal that our policy of strategic patience is over. The President and the Secretary of State have an expectation that China employ multiple points of pressure on North Korea. We know that we don't agree 100% of the time with China, but as the State Department noted yesterday, both President Xi and Secretary Tillerson agreed that there are opportunities for greater cooperation between China and the United States, and acknowledged that there are and will be in the future differences between the two countries. But I think that Secretary Tillerson's trip continued to or helps set us down that path, and I think that the follow-on meetings that the leaders intend to have will be helpful in that vein.
Given the talk last week about the budget, the priorities for the American tax dollars, the need to cut programs like, or make cuts to programs like Wheels in the Ark, is the president going to consider curbing some of his trips to Mar-a-Lago, which the GAO estimates could cost $3 million for a trip for the president to Palm Beach? Is he planning to cut those back at all, given his feelings about the priorities for the Americans' tax dollars?
I think that is a vast reach to suggest. I mean, the president's always travel, and I think the president, wherever he goes, he carries the apparatus of the White House with us. That is just something that happens. The president will continue to go and travel around the country and have meetings to solve the nation's problems. And again, I think because I know you took a little bit of a shot there. I think even the Washington Post, which is no friend to conservatives, even they sided with us that these false sort of narratives on Meals on Wheels. It's not a federal program. 3% of their total budget comes from a block grant that's passed through there. It's a state-run program. They had apparently a phenomenal weekend this week. I get that that's a cute program to point at, but it is false and misleading to us to try to make that narrative stick.
So I know, to your point, that all presidents travel. No president has traveled so often and so early to their own private residence.
But President Bush went to Crawford. I mean, there are places.
It's often.
I get it. But at the same time, the president's very clearly that he's worked 7 days a week. This is where he goes to see his family. He brings people down there. This is part of being president. John.
Thank you, Sean. Turning back to the meeting with Chancellor Merkel on Friday, did the President and the Chancellor discuss the economic crisis in Greece at all? And given the appointment of two officials to the Treasury Department who've been critical of the International Monetary Fund, does the administration see a new or different role for the IMF in resolving the Greek economic crisis?
Let me refer you to the Treasury Department and IMF. I think the readout that we provided on the Chancellor's visit, speaks for itself. They spoke at length as far as what they discussed and what they meant. So I'm not going to step on that, Francesca.
Thank you. Are you aware of any White House officials that are under investigation by the FBI?
No.
Okay. And you mentioned the hangers-on in the campaign earlier and Carter Page, but there was also a question about Roger Stone. Was he also in that category? Is he someone that the president is still in frequent contact with? Because he's often called an informal advisor to the president and a confidant of him.
Mr. Stone is somebody the president's known for a long time. He worked briefly on the campaign, I think, till about August of 2015, from recollection. But they have talked from time to time, but I don't think any time recently. But they had a long relationship going back years where he would provide counsel. And again, he played a role early on in his campaign, but ended that role in August of 2015. And I don't know at all when the last time they even spoke was.
Sean, did the in the meeting this morning with Gates, did the president's cut in NIH funding come up, and how does he square meeting with Gates and sort of focusing on this whole need to continue medical research, and then at the same time want to cut medical research funding by such a large amount?
I mean, I know they talked about cures and health, and I think he applauds a lot of the work that they've done overseas in particular. I don't have a full read on that yet, but I'll try to get you more on it. But look, we've discussed the NIH in particular. I think that there's this assumption in Washington that if you don't spend more on a subject that you're not caring as much. When you look at some of the agencies and departments and programs that we've seen, in many cases they're not meeting their mission. And I think there are cost savings that can be achieved, and so that you can focus the dollars that are being allocated towards a more effective use of the mission at hand. But it's interesting. I mean, only in Washington do you literally judge the success of something by how much money you throw at the problem, not actually whether it's solving the problem or coming up with anything. April.
Sean, I want to go to a couple of topics. One, back on wiretapping, Comey said he had no information supporting that President Obama wiretapped President Trump. So with that, you have Schiff saying things like there are half-truths coming from this president, no truths, it's dangerous, we're alienating our allies, we need to be able to trust our president. And with that, I'm going to ask you, and I need an answer for this, how do you regain trust, as some view him as the boy who cried wolf?
I think if you're citing Adam Schiff's political diatribe at the beginning as some sort of sense of, I mean, he literally went off. You want to talk about, hold on. You want to talk about a series of mistruths and misdirection. I think if you look at that opening statement, it was filled with those. So I don't need to use that as some basis for having to respond to. It was, I was watching a lot of the reporter response on Twitter initially to his sort of diatribe, and I think there were several folks that talked about how he's mischaracterizing and taking things way out of context. So to use that as the basis of some kind of authoritative...
saying there is no information.
I think
and
at this point,
and
again, I think, April, I've addressed this multiple times, at this point, we are at the beginning phases of this, and we have ways to go. John.
I asked specifically on the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, on the budget. How, and this is kind of going back
to... This is number 3 now.
Not really, it's number 2, thank you. How is the president contributing to his own goal of reducing spending, the deficit and the debt, in his management of spending here at the White House?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, we've used the White House, when it looks at a total percentage of the budget, is minuscule. I think that to ask that question, somewhat ironic after seeing Director Mulvaney sit up here the other day and talk about the savings and the cost-cutting measures that we've seen across the entire budget. He sat up here and got grilled on that. And answered effectively how the president is looking at efficiencies and duplicity in all programs throughout government. So it's not just a question of here at the White House, but he's looking at it holistically throughout all of government. But then you look at some of the activities the president's personally engaged at in terms of the F-35, the next generation of the of Air Force One, personally getting in looking at ways in which we can create a more effective and efficient procurement process. That's one area where I think you're going to see the president personally engage on more and more, is looking at all the stuff that the government buys and how we're doing it, our bidding process in so many ways, especially in the Department of Defense.
We know 3 people here are not taking salaries.
Right.
But what about salaries? I'm talking about, since he's making these massive cuts,
right,
is the hurt going to come here as well?
Sure. I mean, it's not just a hurt, but you bring it up. There are multiple people here who are not taking salaries. I mean, that is,
3.
No, way more than 3, April.
How many?
I'll get back to you, but there's several of individuals that are not taking a salary here. So when you talk about commitment to helping to come serve this government, serve the president, and actually help institute a vision, there's a lot of people who have sacrificed tremendously in terms of saying, I'll give up. I've done very well for myself. This country's benefited me. This is an opportunity for me to give back. That there are people well through this organization who have done that. John.
The president met with Dr. Emanuel, as you pointed out a short time ago. He's probably one of the fiercest critics of what the president is trying to do. Of anybody out there, he's made it quite clear that he believes that this will take us back to worse than we were before the Affordable Care Act came in. What did the president hope to gain by meeting with Dr. Emanuel?
Well, he's an architect of Obamacare. I think that despite our political and policy differences, he wants to hear ideas not just of him, but a lot of people. And we've brought in people on both sides of the aisle from both houses, from industry. The idea is to try to make this the best possible. He talked to Elijah Cummings a couple weeks ago about drug prices. It's not about ideology or party. It's about instituting a patient-centric drug and health care system that benefits the American people and gives them the access and the price point that they can get health care and actually get coverage. So it is hearing his ideas, it's listening to his suggestions, and figuring out if we can make it better. Part of the manager's amendment that Speaker Ryan talked about is in large part because we've been listening and making it better and making it better. And as it continues to work its will through the process, it's not just the current bill, but it's also the additional legislation that's part of this overall three-pronged process that we've talked about. So making sure that we do this right and we give the American people the best possible outcome is what this has always been about.
The Speaker wants to get this in front of the House maybe by Thursday. How much will the plan change between now and then compared to what we saw voted on in the first two committees? And is the president going up to the Hill tomorrow?
ENC, Ways and Means and Budget.
Very first two. And is the president going up to the Hill tomorrow morning?
We don't have any announcements on the schedule at this time. He's going to continue to make sure that we do everything we can, and I'll leave the legislative piece up to Speaker Ryan.
How much does he think it's going to change between what we saw voted on by Ways and Means?
It depends on how much. I think Speaker Ryan detailed some additions and ideas and suggestions on your network yesterday with Chris Wallace that he is considering. And I think as we continue to meet with folks, there's some staff level discussions that occurred over the weekend. There'll be more later this afternoon. And to the extent that we can make changes that I think enable us to maintain 218 votes, we will do it. Sarah.
There are a number of the president's supporters on the Hill and elsewhere who worry that the president's refusal to drop the whole wiretapping issue will eclipse some of his other accomplishments. What message does the president have for his supporters who worry that this could be a rabbit hole that might diminish the other things he's trying to do, like health care?
I think there'll be a lot of accomplishments, so they don't need to worry. We've got a lot of things coming down the pike, and I think whether it's health care, tax reform, his infrastructure plan, reforming government, immigration. I mean, I think we're going to have a lot of things to be very proud of that people on both sides of the aisle are going to be excited to see enacted, and so in due time there'll be plenty to be proud of. Sarah.
You dismissed Paul Manafort as sort of an incidental figure in this campaign, that he worked for the campaign for 5 months. He was the campaign chairman. He was there for a number of pivotal decisions. So I'm wondering, how is that insignificant, and is the White House aware of any contacts between Paul Manafort and Russian operatives or suspected Russian operatives, and is that a cause for concern?
Well, just so we're clear, I'm not dismissing Paul Manafort as a hanger-on. I was noting some other folks, as Jonathan pointed out. With respect to Paul, though, I believe, and again, I'm not looking to relitigate the election, but I believe Paul was brought on sometime in June, and by the middle of August, he was no longer with the campaign, meaning that for the entire final stretch of the general election, he was not involved. And so to start to look at some individual that was there for a short period of time, or separately individuals who really didn't play any role in the campaign, and to suggest that those are the basis for anything is a bit ridiculous.
So are you saying it wouldn't be cause for concern if we found out that Paul Manafort was in contact with Russian operatives or suspected?
No, I think that, but to intimate, right? No, but to intimate that somebody was there for 8 weeks and definitely not there in the final 3 months of the campaign, played some kind of lasting role that influenced. You know, again, you realize, I think somewhere between August 12th or the 15th was when he ended his affiliation with the campaign. So my point is to suggest now that if you look at the final 3 months of the campaign, where none of the individuals in question that Democrats brought up over and over again today were affiliated with the campaign, to suggest that somehow shows some high-level collusion is a bit of a stretch, to say the least.
And is the White House aware of any contacts between Paul Manafort and Russian operatives or suspected Russian operatives?
No.
Go ahead, Mark.
Sean, you've been really critical of reports that are based on sources in the past. Today, it seems like the two headlines that we got out of the committee were one, an official confirmation directly from the FBI and the Justice Department that there is an ongoing criminal investigation into whether associates of the sitting president had contacts with Russia and Russian operatives, and whether there was any coordination between those. And the second headline being that there is an official, you had questioned in the past, previously a couple weeks ago, when there were reports in our paper and others that the FBI director was indicating that there was no support for the president's tweets. You said, well, those are just reports, those are not coming from his mouth, he hasn't said it. Okay, we've now got it from his mouth directly in open testimony that there's no evidence that he has to support the president's tweets. I guess the question is, you know, do those two facts, which are now on the record and not attributed to anonymous sourcing, does that cause this White House any concern? And how come you treat the latter, the one about wiretapping, you want to say that's just in the early stages, but on the former one, you want to sort of come to the conclusion that the investigation is sort of gotten to the point where you don't have to worry about that because that's all said and done and everybody's come to the conclusion on that. So that seems like you're treating both of those pieces of news very differently.
Well, first, I think your headlines are bad. I'm glad to rewrite. I'd be glad to if you guys are looking for some help. I'm
for a job.
Our services are at the New York Times disposal if it comes to writing headlines, and we could probably do a couple things on stories too if we're willing to go there. I think because there's a big difference. One is literally talking. There's a big difference. Everyone keeps conflating that there's an investigation into the 2016 election. Got it. No disagreement there, right? But I think that there's a question about collusion between anybody. And my point has been to say over and over again, to the dismay of every one of you guys, is that when the people who have been briefed by the FBI about collusion between individuals, the answer continues to be no. And at some point, take no for an answer. When these people, both sides of the aisle, Obama appointees, elected Democrats, elected Republicans, say no evidence suggested, at some point, it's not just about me, it's about you. Take no for an answer and realize that the people, while you can have an investigation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to jump to the conclusion that, it must be about the collusion between those two things. They've talked about this for a long time. The 17 intelligence agencies have talked about an ongoing investigation into Russia's involvement in the election. That's vastly different than jumping to the conclusion and saying that there must be somehow, therefore, a collusion between individuals on one side. They don't talk about all of the Hillary Clinton collusion that may or may not have occurred, and that was a subject that came up with a Russian official, and yet that has not gotten pursued once. There were 0 minutes paid on the evening news the other night when that Russian official said that they attempted to reach out to both campaigns. 0 minutes. I know. See, I'm an equal opportunity whack.
Does the president need to take no for an answer in the same way that you're urging?
No, because one is a bunch of people who've been briefed who are saying we haven't seen anything, and one is an ongoing. And because when you ask them, they are getting it. The president was very clear, and I think there's continuing to be a very, very literal interpretation of his tweet, which is whether or not there was wiretapping. The president understands that you don't literally wiretap people the same way that you did in the 70s and 80s with wires and things in the top of phone. So, right.
Director Comey didn't focus on wiretapping. He
But again, I think that we are still at the beginning phase of a look as to what kind of surveillance occurred and why. And that there's a question about what leaks occurred, why they're happening. And again, just Director Comey's, because I believe one of the big headlines that should come out of today is that when he talks about the unusually high amount of leaks that are coming out of this and classified information leak, that in itself should be a question. Why is so much information being leaked out now? What are the motives behind it? Who is doing it? And is it threatening our national security? Which I do believe the answer is yes. But there is a lot of other stories. And that's why I think, with all due respect to your two headlines coming out, I do believe there's a lot of headlines coming out. It's just that the only headlines that people want to write are the ones that support a narrative against this administration and not one that actually looks into, how many times do people say that there was no evidence of something happening? How many times or how much classified information is being leaked? There's a lot of headlines that should be written today about a lot of the stuff that's ongoing. And I know that we have an ongoing hearing, but there's a lot of other things that need to get discussed and aren't being happening. Why did the DNC not let the FBI look at their servers? Why has that story not getting in? Because I would assume that if somebody was victim of something, which they've yelled from the rooftops. Hold on.
I'm sorry. I'm curious. The implication of that is
No.
what?
The question is, why is none of that being looked at?
Question, but
I don't know what but my point is that not to draw an implication, but to merely ask a question. Which all I'm getting at is that suddenly none of the questions regarding any of this seem to get asked or answered or explored, and yet
You won.
You're here, Brian. You get the same treatment that Jonathan does. That doesn't mean you get to jump in. So the answer that I'm getting at is why are none of those questions being asked? Why is no one taking no for an answer when it comes to all of these individuals saying that they've seen nothing? But there are a series of headlines that I would suggest need to get written, and frankly, stories. I'm glad to do that as I offered. George.
I'd like to try to clarify two things. In the future, when you from that podium read from news articles or cite news articles, can we assume that you're vouching for the accuracy of those articles?
I think merely reading a story that's in a paper is not vouching for it, it's reading the story.
It doesn't put a White House in front.
No, I think reading a series of things when asked a question, where is this narrative coming from, and citing a multitude of stories that are in the public domain is not necessarily endorsing everything. I read that's a silly, assertion. We're reading stories that you and your colleagues, and not necessarily you at National Journal, have put out, but that several people in here whose publications have put something out. Simply recitating those things is not an endorsement.
The second thing is, when you talk to the British about the GCHQ thing, did you tell them that the White House would not raise that again, or can you talk about that conversation?
There was merely an explanation of what we did and why we did it, which is what I just said to you, and that was it. Simply that. Thank you guys for that. We'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully some of you get a chance to go down today.
March along, sing a song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name. We're the army and proudly proclaim. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. And it's high, high, hey, the army's on its way. Count off the cane is loud and strong. For wherever we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is mine. bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh,
guys. The hearing is still, Judge Gorsuch's hearing is ongoing, and considering the significant attention, I'm going to try to keep this a little on the shorter side today. The president's making a full day of progress towards some of his biggest promises that he's made to the American people. This morning he met with the House Republican Conference members on Capitol Hill ahead of the House's scheduled vote on the American Health Care Act, which is currently scheduled for Thursday. During the meeting, the president reminded members of the House conference that repealing and replacing Obamacare has been a promise that Republicans have been making to voters for years. Members made it clear that if voters put a Republican in the White House and continue Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, that we would repeal and replace this ill-advised and legislation. And for every member who pledged the American people that they would deliver on their promise, this is really their chance. This is the repeal of Obamacare that Republicans have been working on for years, and voters have been waiting for this for some time. On Thursday, as the House gathers on the floor and casts their votes for the ACH, it'll exactly be 7 years after President Obama has signed Obamacare into law. We're hoping to make this the last anniversary that Americans will have to endure Obamacare. Republicans have been working to repeal and replace this misguided law ever since, and now, under President Trump, we will finally be able to take this step forward towards fundamental reform of our healthcare system. I think most Americans remember the lines that were used to sell Obamacare 7 years ago. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. But for millions of Americans, those lines proved to be nothing more than empty promises. Plans that their families had relied on for years were suddenly canceled. Premiums and deductibles skyrocketed, leaving many who had plans unable to actually use them. And insurers fled the marketplace. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans only have one insurer offering plans on their Obamacare exchange. President Trump and Republicans in Congress will keep their promise by reforming the system once and for all. And that's exactly what we're doing with the American Health Care Act, which, along with the additional legislative and administrative action that is part of the three-prong approach that we continue to outline, will finally give all Americans the health care system they deserve, where market-based competition leads to more affordable, higher quality health care opportunities. This is an ongoing process, and the president has made it clear to Congress that they should be open to incorporating some of the common sense policy proposals that have been suggested by members in both chambers who share their commitment to improving the healthcare system. To that end, the House introduced several technical and policy amendments to the legislation last night, which the president acknowledged on Capitol Hill this morning. They include delivering more immediate relief from Obamacare's taxes, accelerating the repeal of these taxes from 2017 rather than from 2018, and ensuring that millions of Americans who paid Obamacare's penalties or taxes can reclaim their hard-earned dollars from the IRS. It's making it easier for Americans to deduct more of the cost of their medical expenses, protecting life by prohibiting taxpayer dollars from being used to help purchase insurance plans that currently cover abortion, giving states additional flexibility for their Medicaid program, covering traditional adults and children populations while maintaining baseline funding for elderly and disabled populations, giving states the ability to implement optional, reasonable work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents as part of their Medicaid programs, freezing Obamacare's Medicaid expansion while allowing for a responsible unwinding so that people who enroll before 2020 will continue to be supported by the program, and providing a more generous reimbursement for elderly and disabled Medicaid enrollees, recognizing that those populations have unique needs that must be taken care of. After he returned to the White House from the House, speaking to the House Republican Conference, the president received his daily intelligence briefing. Then the president signed S-442, the NASA Administration Transition Authorization Act of 2017, acting on another of the president's most ambitious promises to the American people. Many may recall in his joint address, the president said, quote, "American footprints on distant worlds are not too big of a dream," end quote. And with this bill, he is taking the latest step towards making that dream a reality by reiterating NASA's mission to ensure America remains a leader in space exploration. This bipartisan, bicameral legislation provides NASA with the full support it needs to fulfill this and many other important missions, including supporting NASA's plan to explore deep space and sending astronauts to Mars, including an endorsement of launching the Mars 2020 rover. The rover will explore a site that is likely to have been habitable, seeking signs of past life and testing compelling samples and techniques for future robotic and eventual human exploration of Mars, reaffirming that NASA remains a fully multi-mission agency with a balanced set of core missions in space science, space technology, aeronautics, human spaceflight, exploration, and education, endorsing NASA's continued progress towards launching the James Webb Telescope, which will be a giant leap forward in our ever-evolving quest to understand the universe, and establishing an astronaut occupational health care program, something that NASA has considered a priority for years. After the bill signing, the Vice President also announced that the President will be taking action shortly to relaunch the National Space Council, which the Vice President will chair. The President was honored to sign this new bill into law so that NASA can continue its work towards making America the world leader in space exploration once again. Also this morning, the Vice President hosted a breakfast meeting with Prime Minister al-Abadi of Iraq. We provided a readout on the President's meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday as well, and I believe there's been a readout of the Vice President's as well. At 3 p.m. this afternoon, the President will meet with members of Congress who are part of the House Tuesday group to discuss the American Health Care Act. And this evening, the President will speak at the National Republican Congressional Committee March dinner. Over on the Senate side of the Hill, the President's pick for the Supreme Court, Judge Neil Gorsuch, has been doing a phenomenal job in the Senate today during his first day of questioning. The judge's eloquent testimony yesterday was widely praised from both sides of the aisle, and it's clear that everyone agrees from a broad spectrum that Judge Gorsuch is a very qualified person to serve on the Supreme Court. As the judge noted today, quote, "A judge is there to make sure that every person, poor or rich, mighty or meek, gets equal protection under the law," end quote. His records show that he's lived up to this commitment throughout his entire career, and he's continuing to prove that he's exactly the type of jurist we need on the Supreme Court throughout the questioning that's started today. Today is also National Agriculture Day, for those who are keeping note. The world needs America's farmers and ranchers to lead, just as the world needs America to lead. Global food demand is expected to increase by 50 to 97% by 2050. The world can't afford for America's farmers and ranchers to retreat, but the agriculture industry has met its share of challenges in recent years. While our farmers are the most efficient in the world, margins have been tightening, regulations have been multiplying, and exports, which has historically accounted for over 1/5 of U.S. farm production, have been declining due to unwise trade policies. The President promised the many people in the agriculture industry and throughout rural America that he would not allow this to continue, and he will continue to pursue policy changes that will reverse this disturbing trend. Quickly, in terms of follow-up from yesterday, I was asked about North Korea, and I want to provide a quick update from the NSC. Quote, "The United States, in coordination with our allies, is exploring a new range of diplomatic, security, and economic measures in response to the grave and escalating threat posed by North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs," end quote. And before I open it up for questions, let me just run through a few scheduling updates. Tomorrow, the President will stop by the Women in Healthcare panel hosted by CMS Administrator Seema Verma. There will also be a series of meetings with members of Congress tomorrow. In the morning, the President will meet with members to discuss the American Health Care Act, and in the afternoon, he will meet with members of the Congressional Black Caucus. On Thursday, the President will have lunch with Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin before hosting a meeting with truckers and representatives from trucking companies on health care that we discussed yesterday. In many states throughout their country, trucking happens to be one of the largest employers, and it's important to understand the impact of healthcare legislation on this important industry. I'll have updates on the weekend schedule for you, hopefully tomorrow. And finally, yesterday, pursuant to the President's executive order on interior enforcement that he signed on January 25th, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, released its first weekly list of detainer requests, which local law enforcement agencies have failed to comply with. These examples were criminal illegals who have been arrested or convicted in many cases of serious and violent crimes threaten public safety. In each instance, local law enforcement is refusing to cooperate with ICE in its efforts to remove illegal immigrants who have committed a crime. It is part of the President's continued efforts to keep our community safe. A copy of this report is available on the ICE website that details all of the municipalities where there has been an issue and the crime that has been committed and the person and not necessarily the person's name, but the offense in which they were convicted for. And with that, I'll be glad to take your questions. Since we're talking Supreme Court, John Roberts. Wow. Come on. That was good.
Not bad. Unless there's an Alito in the audience. On healthcare, the president came away from Capitol Hill sounding pretty positive about where he was going to go on Thursday, but then at the same time, Heritage Action came out and said it was going to encourage members to vote no. Club for Growth is taking out ads attacking this bill. Jim Jordan said president's great, but it's still a bad bill. This is going to go to a vote day after tomorrow. What gives the president the sense of optimism that he can get this through, and might he request more changes from Speaker Ryan before it goes to a vote?
Well, I think we've talked about this for days. There's been a lot of input from members of Congress. And I think that the meeting this morning really was a huge sign of support. There was a lot of enthusiasm and optimism, not just for the bill itself, but for something that, as I noted, conservatives and Republicans and a lot of Democrats, frankly, have been fighting for a while, which is a more patient-centric healthcare system. I think the president's continued to engage with members. He will continue to do that all the way through Thursday. But as I also noted, there were a lot of changes that were made by the Speaker last night. Additional legislation, the three-pronged approach that we've talked about in the past, has been put forward to actually make sure that members understood the comprehensive nature of this. This is one vehicle. There's a huge administrative piece that Secretary Price will administer through administrative action that was given to him when they passed this bill and gave that authority to Kathleen Sebelius, then the Secretary of Health and Human Services, to implement pieces that they couldn't get done legislatively. We can now unwind a lot of that and add a lot of consumer-based and competition measures through the administrative thing. But then the third prong, all of the other stuff that we've talked about for years as Republicans, buying across state lines, expanding health savings accounts, et cetera, all of that has now been introduced as well. And I think that he continues to meet with members and walk away with a very, very optimistic view of where the bill is headed. I think a lot of the measures that have been changed and tweaked and updated have assuaged members who had concerns or wanted to see some additional tightening. But keep in mind, if you are a conservative who has been fighting for repeal and replace, this is your chance. If you are a conservative who has been looking to address out of control entitlement spending, this is the first attempt. This is the first reform of an entitlement program in terms of Medicaid in 30 years. These are a truly conservative set of principles that we are fighting for. The competition that's in the bill, the ability to allow prices to come down and choice to go up. There's nothing more conservative that is in this bill. And I think as members continue to talk about ideas that have been included in this bill and the principles of it, we feel very good going into the final stretch.
May he seek more changes in order to further assuage? So
It's possible, but I think that we've made some very positive steps forward. So I don't want to rule anything out. But I will say that I feel very good about this where it stands now, and I think the more and more that members meet with the president, the more they understand how important this is to the overall agenda that we're seeking to pass. And I think if we can, as the president noted this morning to members, if you can repeal Obamacare, replace it with a healthcare system that does what conservatives and independents and frankly some Democrats have talked about it for years, that does exactly that kind of thing, instill choice, drive down costs, allows people to actually get care that they've been promised, and then get on to things like tax reform, we will have an amazing first year in office. And I think the president reminded them this is the first step in an amazing agenda that he set forth and that we can work together on. Eamon.
Thanks, Sean. Members of this administration have talked about the stock market as a real-time barometer for how the administration is performing. This afternoon, though, the stock market has been off as much as 200 points on the Dow. Some commentators on Wall Street are suggesting that's because traders are starting to sense a lack of progress in the Trump legislative agenda, worried that he might not be able to accomplish everything he set out to do. Does the president believe that today's dip in the Dow is a result of his performance as president of the United States?
Well, I think to look at any one day is nothing that we've always cautioned. I think overall it still continues to be up tremendously. And I think when you look at not just that one indicator, I think if you want to get you probably know better than anybody in terms of what you guys cover, that you can't look at one indices and say that is the benchmark of an entire economy, but you see confidence levels both in small business and in other surveys that show that there is continued confidence in the market and optimism in the market. You see manufacturers coming back to America talking about investment, major CEOs and small businesses trying to grow the economy and talk about job creation. Those are the real indicators. And again, I think the numbers that we saw last month, again, 1 month isn't make a record, but I think that it was very promising, not just because of what the number was, but what it had been forecast to be, right? So it was expected to be 200,000, came in at 235. So again, when you're overperforming, I think that shows a sign of optimism and confidence in the market. I think, again, I just want to make sure that we're clear before we go into as we continue through the months. One report does not make something to base an entire record off of. But I think that we feel very good about where things are headed and the direction things are going, not just in terms of the indices and the ups and downs of the market, but also in terms of the number of manufacturers that are walking in and restating their commitment to grow jobs, expand, et cetera, in the market.
You'll have that confidence that President Trump will be able to get a tax cut done this year that would be in place for next year? Is that something
look,
that
I
they
think
should worry about at all?
we're well on our way to seeing this agenda done. The president's rolled out the budget, which I think reaffirmed his commitment to fiscal austerity and to the priorities he set out of defending this country, making the increases in national defense and homeland security that he promised, prioritizing other things in the budget. We've got Obamacare done on immigration, executive order wise, and I think that when you're doing big things, Obamacare, tax reform, I mean, the healthcare system's a fifth of the economy. That's no small feat. And I think in terms of what you've seen so far, going through three committees, moving along, the Senate ready to take it up, his pick of Neil Gorsuch, the agenda's moving along at a very brisk pace in terms of what his priorities were and where I think we're headed.
Sean, last month, I guess, you talked and asked about the consideration potentially of a carbon tax, which I guess was discussed in a meeting at the White House. We're hearing some reports that there's a pretty lively internal debate. Gary Cohn might be someone who's more prone to that. Can you just discuss, is the president considering a carbon tax, and what are sort of the various opinions that are going on in the White House?
I think there's a robust debate going on with respect to comprehensive tax reform. And as we've mentioned, I mean, our goal right now is to get through Thursday, and that's what the president has talked about very publicly. We need to get Obamacare repealed and replaced and move on to tax reform and some of the other trade reviews that we've talked about, immigration. There's a lot of things on the agenda, but I'm not going to comment on specific prongs of that. I will just tell you that obviously there's a lot of people who recognize that we haven't had comprehensive tax reform since 1986, and that there's a lot of pieces in this that we need to examine and get to, and there's a lot of voices and opinions that get shared with him, and so I'm not at a position where I'm going to get into commenting on piecemeal on where it is, but I will say that's even more reason that let's get past Thursday. When you look at the week ahead, real quick, Glenn, you in terms of this, the repeal and replace aspect in Gorsuch, I think from a legislative standpoint, going back to Eamon's question, I think it's a pretty big week for the White House to seeing all this done. Hunter.
Thank you, Sean. President Trump has previously indicated that he wanted to appoint pro-life judges who would be willing to overturn Roe versus Wade. Yet in his testimony today, Judge Gorsuch said he would have walked out the door if President Trump asked if he had this position. Is President Trump still confident that Judge Gorsuch would be willing to overturn Roe versus Wade? And is this position still important to him?
I think the president's comments speak for themselves. I think the president's list that he's put out on 20 are jurists that both the Federalist Society and Heritage have deemed to be people who interpret the Constitution as originalists, as people who aren't looking to legislate from the bench. And I'm not going to take the bait during a live hearing to comment on that, but I appreciate the effort. Ronica.
Thank you, Sean. I have two questions on the same story. Recently, a 14-year-old girl, she was raped in the boys' bathroom of her high school. A 17 and 18-year-old boy have been charged. One of the boys, we know, unlawfully entered the country. Both of them have outstanding orders with ICE. So here's my first question about it. Currently, schools are prohibited from denying access to public education based on immigration status. Does the president hear a story like that and think that it should change or be addressed in a future executive order?
I think, first, let me just say that this is a tragic event, and it's horrendous and horrible and disgusting what this young woman in Rockville went through. I can't possibly imagine. So first of all, let's remember the human side of this, that this is a tragic event that no child, no person, no parent should ever have to deal with. Schools should be a place where a parent puts their child on a bus or drops them off or sees them off and knows that they're safe. And the idea that this occurred is shocking, disturbing, horrific, and whatever other words that come to mind that someone can think of, because this is not, schools should be a safe place where children are there to learn and to feel safe in that kind of environment. And to know that this happened in the circumstances, this young woman in particular fought to come to this country legally because of the freedoms and the treasures of this nation. And to think that this kind of tragedy would occur to someone who's personally endured that kind of struggle to come to this nation and then face this is reprehensible. And it is not who we are as a country. I think it is troubling, and I think further to your question, the president recognizes that education is a state-run and a local-run issue, but I think it is cause for concern what happened there. And I think the city should look at its policies, and I think that this is something that authorities are going to have to look at. I think from an immigration standpoint, clearly to see somebody, there's so many facets of this case that deserve question. Why was there, I think he was 17 or 18 years old. 18, thank you. And how does that person get put into the 9th grade? There's so many issues that come up in this case. I will leave it to authorities to get through, but I think that we are in the early stages of this, and there's a lot that needs to get addressed with respect to this case in particular.
So I hear you about it being a state issue. Let's talk about something, though, that the president has implemented and introduced Voice. Is Voice, Victims of Immigration Crime Enforcement, is that enough to support a 14-year-old?
No, it's one piece. The president understands that victims need a voice, which is why he brought it in there to help them when they're specifically targeted or victims of a crime by people who are here illegally. But I think part of the reason that the president has made illegal immigration and crackdown such a big deal is because of tragedies like this. We act so many times when we talk about this and say, well, is the president going to, how is the president, why is the president dealing with this and because of this priority? Well, part of the reason is because of the tragedy that this young girl dealt with, had inflicted upon her, whatever the word is. But this is why he's passionate about this, because people are victims of these crimes in terms of them. They're victims of the economic piece of this. There's a national security impact, but immigration pays its toll on our people if it's not done legally. And this is another example, and it's why the president's so passionate about this. But he recognizes that it's multifaceted, why we have to be tough at the border, why I just read off that this executive order is dealing with people who have committed crimes, who local enforcement agencies or municipalities or at the state level are not dealing with it. And if you go to the ICE website and download this, you'll see it's over 30-something pages of cases where there's a person that is convicted of a crime that local people, local municipal law enforcement, for whatever reason, and in some cases they're prohibited, but for one reason or another are not enforcing the law and not turning that individual over to federal authorities to be deported. And I think this is another example of why this issue needs to be addressed. John.
Sean, is the president going to hold Republicans who vote against health care accountable? Are they going to pay a price if they vote against this bill?
I think they'll probably pay a price at home, meaning I think that you can't go promise over and over again since 2010 in the case that the member's been there that long, but at least for those who have been there that long, and at least and even the new ones, this was a major component of the last election. And I think there was probably not a single Republican member in itself who went out and talked about this. And I think when you realize the component to this bill and that the president worked with the House and the Senate to put something together that achieved a promise that was made to voters, I think there's going to be a price to be paid, but it's going to be with their own voters. And they're going to have to go back and explain to them why they made a commitment to them and then didn't follow through. And one of the things that's interesting that people who agree or don't agree with the president in terms of his legislative agenda at least give him high marks, regardless of whether or not they subscribe to his agenda, for keeping his word and his promises. And I think that's one of the things that he's made very clear this morning. We pledged to the American people at the congressional level, at the Senate level, at the presidential level to go do something. And this bill, while it probably not everybody gets everything they wanted, does exactly what we said. It's repealing it and replacing it with all of the principles and the aspects that we discussed throughout not only last cycle, but in a lot of these cases back through 2010. Margaret.
Will he campaign against those Republicans?
Let's get through the vote. I think one of the things that he made clear this morning was that he was going to make sure that the people who did support this, he would be out there supporting them. And so I'm not going to focus on the negative as much as the positive today. And he made it clear to members that for those of you who go out there and keep your word and support it, we're going to make sure that we remember those who stood by us and who stood by the word that they gave to their voters. Margaret.
Thanks. Okay, so that's what I was going to ask, but let me try.
Oh.
That's okay, I've got another one, don't worry. So my other one, but I'm going to go back to that, is on the laptop restrictions by the U.S. and now the U.K. It certainly sounds like that may have been in response to some kind of a specific security threat. What can you talk about from the podium in as much specificity as you can, and if you can't do specifics, at least help us to understand, are there multiple threats? Is there one threat? Are there multiple, what is going on here?
So yesterday the TSA announced new enhanced measures on flights inbound to the United States from 10 of more than the 250 countries that have flights coming into the United States that serve as the last point of departure. I think even ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, who we've not always shared the same point of view with, even agreed by saying, quote, these steps are both necessary and proportional to the threat. Elevated intelligence that we're aware of indicates that terrorist groups continue to target commercial aviation and are aggressive in pursuing innovative methods to undertake their attacks, to include smuggling of explosive devices and various consumer objects. Based on this information, the Secretary of Homeland Security and the TSA administrator have determined that it's necessary to enhance security procedures for passengers at certain last point of departure airports. That being said, I'm not going to go any further than that, and I would refer any further comment to the TSA.
Can I try what I was going to try earlier then? Mark Meadows seems like a nice guy. And the president seemed like he was kind of joking, but has the president decided in his own mind yet whether he thinks it would be appropriate, potentially, to mount primary opposition, campaign for primary opposition in Republican congressional primaries in the midterms?
Mark Meadows was a long-time early supporter of the president. He had some fun at his expense this morning during the conference meeting, and I think he continued to express hope that Congressman Meadows, who's the head of the Freedom Caucus, would continue to see the efforts that have been made to make this better, more, and address a lot of the concerns out there. But he has made it very clear that he was having fun with him. The president's committed to making sure that this gets passed. We'll go from there. Vivian.
Thanks, John. First, a follow-up to Margaret's question. Why wait for the new aviation regulations 96 hours to implement it? I mean, isn't the president's mantra on counterterrorism that we have to, kind of sneak up on our enemies, not let them know our tactics?
So I'm going to ultimately refer you back to TSA, but I will tell you that remember that these are 10 airports of last point of departure to the United States out of 250 that come here. Part of it is to allow, you have to provide appropriate notification to the host country, to the host airlines, and give them opportunity to get those procedures in place. I'm not going to comment any further about the security measures that have been taking place or are taking place, just to continue to refer you back to TSA. But I will tell you that I think that implementing something of this nature in that time frame is pretty darn quick.
Okay, one more, sorry, I had a follow-up, sorry. Something totally unrelated. I wanted to ask, has the White House counsel approved Ivanka Trump getting a West Wing office and clearance? And so what is the administration's thinking behind this? What is she going to do?
I don't think the council actually approves office space, but I get your question. Right. Ivanka has taken on several measures to promote high standards of ethical conduct. Even though she's not a federal employee, she'll follow the restrictions that would apply if she were. She's taken these steps with the advice of counsel and in consultation with the Office of Government Ethics. Hallie.
John, two quick ones for you. One on healthcare to follow up on the follow-ups. You made very clear that the president was going to be supporting those who supported the bill. And I know you don't want to talk about the flip side of the coin, but when he talked this morning in the closed-door meeting about people paying a price, losing seats, not getting majority, Is that an implied threat from the president to these members who don't back this bill?
No, I think it's a political reality. I think if you go out and promise the American people something and your voters something, especially on a scale like this, and frankly, as I said, I mean, there's obviously members that have been there 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms, but this is something that as a party we've made very clear, if you give us this, American people, we will get this done. And I think that to go and make a promise of and a pledge of this magnitude and not to follow it through, I'm sure that voters would be upset, and we've seen this in the past. I think and it's something that I think the president, as I mentioned earlier, has staked, has earned high marks for, is keeping his word. And I think the president was stating a political reality. If we go out there and make these pledges to the American people and don't do what we said we've done on these big things, then I don't think they're going to continue to want to see us in the majority, and they're going to look for an alternative.
And so the second, well, just to follow,
Yeah.
will he remember the names of those who don't back the bill?
We'll see. John Gizzi.
Well, actually, I do have a second actual topic. I just
No,
want to
that was
follow quickly
actually-
on yesterday. I just want to
I
clarify
love your
that.
counting. It's like CBO. Sorry, CBO. Come on, that was...
Do you want to elaborate on that?
No, I don't. Go ahead.
I do want to ask about the Russia testimony from yesterday. I know you obviously addressed it from the podium
Yeah.
24 hours ago, but there was sort of this interesting moment that happened a little bit after the briefing where Director Comey was asked about sort of live tweets coming from the president and his account at the same time that the hearing was happening. And Director Comey was fact-checking the president in real time, essentially saying he was incorrect in what he was tweeting. Is there concern on the part of the White House about the president's credibility in that situation, that his own director is correcting his tweets and what he's saying in real time like that?
Well, I mean, let's just be clear. I mean, he was answering questions. I mean, it's not like he was out there. He was responding to a question. But I think it's important to note with respect to this that and I saw a couple comments yesterday. Senator Coons took issue with a couple of the comments that we made. Let me just read to you. I know you guys love this when I do this, so I'm just going to entertain you for a second. Senator Chris Coons, this is his quote, direct quote. Quote, I have no hard evidence of collusion, end quote. Director Clapper, quote, not to my knowledge, end quote. Senator Tom Cotton, quote, not that I've seen and not that I'm aware of. This is in reference to any type of collusion with Russia that occurred. Obama CIA Director, Acting CIA Director Morell, quote, there's smoke but there's no fire. Senator Chuck Grassley, after the Comey briefing, Doc, I can say at POTUS and at Clapper are both right. No evidence of Trump collusion with the So, we've now gone over this on multiple occasions, but at some point there's a distinction between an investigation that it goes into Russia's involvement in 2016 and this continued narrative that falsely tries to link the president or the White House into any of it. They continue to see that there is nothing there. Every single person who has been briefed, who has come out and publicly talked about it, Republican, Democrat, former DNI, former CIA directors, Obama appointees, have said no evidence. And so I get that we keep getting asked, but I mean, my point is that was one of the tweets though that he addressed. Is it said, former DNI continues to know, and that was actually true. These are their quotes. This is what they've said. So it's not a question. I think sometimes you come back to us. At some point, the question has to be to the individuals who've said this, to whether it's Chris Coons from Delaware, or former Director Clapper, or former CIA Acting Director Morell. They're the ones who've said these things on the record. They're the ones who've been briefed by the intelligence community, by the FBI, and come out and said there is no collusion. And so at some point to fact check the president for merely quoting them is not, the question should be directed at them, not us. But over and over again, it's come to the same conclusion. So, Caitlin.
Hey, John.
All right, John.
We'll let John
Then
go
Caitlin.
first.
That was very nice of you. It's National Ag Day afterwards.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay. I have two questions. First, the author David Horowitz, in his book, The Big Agenda, writes of what he calls, quote, a deep state, end of quote, in which he said these are Obama holdovers in government who are trying to undercut the president's agenda. This has been widely repeated on social media. Does the president himself believe in this deep state?
Well, I've been asked this question before, and I'll give you the same answer I've given before, which is I think there are people that burrow into the government after an administration. This is going back since the beginning of time. They used to call it ram specking. It's suddenly no longer permitted, but in terms of that same way. But this has been going on since the country came to be. where people burrow in after an administration into a civil servant job. But sure, that there's people after 8 years of Obama that found their way into government, so it should be no huge secret. Okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Other question on,
Ram specking?
oh, yeah.
Oh, Google it.
I remember Ram, I remember when,
Have you ever seen my spelling? Come on. Ram specking. It was named after a form. I mean, we're going to go through a history lesson here, guys. Thank you.
Right. My other question was, over the weekend, Governor Graco Ramirez, the head of the Mexican Governors Association, was again in Washington and in a much publicized statement said that Mexico had scored its first victory over the proposed wall. He said that in the president's budget, there's a line item for $2.6 billion
in FY18
in tax dollars, and no mention of Mexico paying for the wall in any way. He's claimed a victory in that. Your response to Governor Graco Ramirez?
It's a little early to be claiming victory. I think the president's made it clear that that he was going to use the current process to start the construction of the wall, and that there would be ways that fulfillment of that pledge would come through. Caitlin.
Thank you. The administration and the president have repeatedly said that over the next few weeks they will present evidence that he was wiretapped. And last week he said it would be coming this week and he may speak on it this week. Can we expect the president to this week present evidence that he was wiretapped by Barack Obama, or will he speak about it? Because he didn't mention it last night in his rally in Kentucky.
Right. Well, let's see how the week goes. Margaret.
Sean, when we've heard from the president before talk about the need for this health care plan to pass, he's talked about the importance next of tax reform and the rest. At what point do you think that this agenda could be imperiled as you look at the vote count? Because you are also going to have a further fight, of course, to get any of this through the Senate.
Sorry, so at what point will the vote count?
This seems to be such a centerpiece of the rest of the president's agenda. So given that it's still not there's no certainty in terms of passage at this point, I mean, how concerned are you that Thursday could imperil the president's agenda?
Well, I think the president's visit this morning was very well received. I think we continue down the path to get the votes. We got a ways to go. We got to get to the Senate next. But I think members understand that this is something that has been at the heart of what Republicans have campaigned on. And I feel very good headed into this. The president continues to talk to members, and we're going to make sure that we grow the vote as much as we can. But with respect to the rest of the agenda, I think all of the issues that the president campaigned on are things that the House and the Senate both look forward to taking up. There's, whether it's trade or immigration or comprehensive tax reform, all of these issues are stuff that many Republicans have campaigned on for a long time and are eager to get going. The president's made it very clear, as he did last night as well, that, look, part of we've got to keep moving along if we want to get big things done. There's a lot that can get done during this administration, during the first term, and he wants to get as much of it done as possible. And so the quicker we get repeal and replace done and put the American Health Care Act in place, the better. And that's just the nature of it is. But I think when you look at the speed in which we've moved, it's been very responsible. We've allowed the committees to do their work their will. The House has taken up the amendments. It's been online. So this is, I think there's always a balance between jamming it down and getting it done and over with, which is how the Democrats operated at one point when they legislated, when they finally moved on their bill, versus how this is done. But I think we've struck in a very nice balance on this.
At which point will it be Trump care? The president said today it could happen. We asked during the voters'
We'll have to see. Right now, it's the American Health Care Act, and we're trying to get it done. Anita.
Two questions. First, the Kansas legislature is on the verge of possibly passing a Medicaid expansion, and the current version of the health care bill does not allow states to pass that. And so I'm wondering, as you know, most legislatures are currently meeting across the country. Will there be an exception for states if they expand before any new bill comes in?
It would be addressed in the legislation. I don't believe there's an exception clause. So I don't, but I also don't, it would be far be it for me to say at this point. The bill's getting ready to move to the House. The legislature is meeting. I don't want to prejudge the outcome yet, but I don't believe, from my understanding, that there's any kind of clause that says if.
And then secondly, tomorrow you mentioned the Congressional Black Caucus. Is there a specific topic healthcare, 5 topics. What can you tell us about the president's message to them, and how did it come about? I know there's been some back and forth on getting a meeting going. How did that come about?
April's about to. Okay, don't drag April into this.
Didn't say a name. Didn't say a name.
This has been something that the president's talked about for a while. He met with Congressman Elijah Cummings. He started off in a phone call probably a month or so ago where they discussed prescription drugs and the need to get it down. And then the conversation continued. Our legislative affairs team early on went to some of their meetings and started having a dialogue with them. And that dialogue continued, and there was a desire to have a meeting. The president wanted to have them down. I think there's going to be a range of issues that get discussed that range from drug prices to infrastructure investment and education, HBCUs. There'll be a range, and I think that's part of it. There's no set agenda to say we must talk about these things, and obviously I think healthcare is going to come up too. The president wants to get their idea before April jumps out of her seat. I'll give her.
Thank you for giving me a follow-up. I want to follow up on the CBC, and I have another question on another subject. So with the CBC, since you're saying you went through all of this prior to the fact that he became president, that there was an effort to reach out to the CBC. Mm-hmm. So with all of this understanding that they are an important group to deal with in handling some of the issues, the urban issues, or issues that pertain to their community, how does the president plan to move forward in working with them, particularly as some just don't see eye to eye with him?
I think part of this is it continues to have a dialogue, April. I mean, it's simply sitting down with people, talking about issues, talking about common ground. I think if you look at the conversation that he began and continued with Congressman Elijah Cummings, they found common ground. The president talked about areas where, despite some of the narratives that are out there, there were issues that they probably both share a concern for, and that they can work on together. And maybe they won't agree on 100% or 60%, but maybe there's 15, 20, or 30% of the issues. Maybe there's one bill in particular that they can work on. But there's a willingness to sit down and talk, and I think that's the first step in the process of any of these. It's not just your own party, and the president's shown this on several of these meetings, where it's not just business leaders. He's brought in the union leaders. Talked about healthcare. Yesterday he had Dr. Zeke Emanuel in. It's not about just bringing in people who agree with you. It's about people across the spectrum who can offer ideas. And the president's, and I get it that inner cities aren't exclusive. The rebuilding of inner cities aren't the only issue. But he's elevated the status of historically black colleges and universities, bringing that office into the White House to help coordinate some of the federal government activities. He's talked about rebuilding the inner cities. He's talked about school choice. A lot of issues that law and order and healthcare. And there's issues that impact urban areas, minority communities, whether they live in rural areas or urban areas. But I think that dialogue needs to continue because it can only help, and I think that's what we look forward to tomorrow.
And the second subject, as you're talking about bringing in groups, you're also bringing in the truckers, and there is a concern in the trucking industry about something called e-logs. It's going to happen at the end of the year where truckers, be it truckers with commercial trucks or mom and pop businesses, all of them are going to have computers to log in to monitor the time you drive, the stop and speed, etc. And many people are saying that it cuts into their income. Where does the president stand on that? And I know he's meeting about health care.
I think let's see if that comes up in the meeting, and then I'll have a readout. But I know, I understand that's more of a DOT issue, so I would refer you to the Department of Transportation.
They're very concerned about it. Would he at least?
I understand that, and I hope that comes up. Jeff Mason.
Sean, a follow-up on the DHS airline issue. If there's a danger to Americans or to flyers generally with having laptops or things that are bigger than a cell phone in planes from those 10 countries, why would that not also be a danger from other countries?
As you can imagine, I can't talk about the intelligence that we have. I can just tell you that the steps that are being taken are appropriate, commensurate with the intelligence that we have, and then refer you to the Department of Homeland Security and specifically the Transportation Security Administration.
One other question that's not related to that. Okay. The presidents traditionally issue a greeting to those celebrating the Iranian New Year, Nowruz.
Mm-hmm.
Will President Trump be doing that today?
Let me get back to you. I know that I don't want to get ahead of myself on that, but we may have something for you later. I've got to check on that. But thank you guys very much. Let's get back to watching Neil Gorsuch, and I will see you tomorrow. We're going to have a week full of briefings. I'm excited. And by the way, I am very happy that the individual in the press corps who took Tom Brady's jersey, that has been returned properly. Another bad on the press, but we have righted that wrong. Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you very much for watching and joining us. This is Jen from Golden State Times. Please give this stream a thumbs up. And also, once it gets uploaded, make sure you share it. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for making us number one. And we hope to see you guys here tomorrow for another presser. The confirmation hearing for Neil Gorsuch is continuing. So we might bring it to you live in just a few minutes if it's still going on, or we'll continue it tomorrow morning. But we have some videos being uploaded later on today, so stay tuned. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope that you guys, if you're new, you join the community by hitting that subscribe button. Also, click that notification bell so you can get a heads up on when we go live. Like I said, guys, thank you very much. Thank you to all the moderators for keeping the chat clean and enjoyable for everyone. Make sure to smash that like button on your way out, and we hope to see you guys here next time. But until then, peace.
Bye.